Before we start the video, I wanted to indicate that I am not a mental health professional. I'm not a therapist. I am only giving advice for things that have been suggested to me to try and things that have worked for me. So I wanted to address that before we started. Correcte and salvete, omnes. So today we are going to talk about mental health in graduate studies. This is a somewhat touchy topic, but we have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So there's several things that you can do to cope with mental health issues. I personally think that it is important to talk about them because otherwise the stigma around mental health issues is going to continue. A lot of people have told me it's absolutely taboo to talk about the mental health issues you have, and that can affect whether or not you get into graduate school, and I think that's ridiculous, and I think that's part of the stigma that we need to destroy. There are so many people I know that have mental health issues, whether or not they're in graduate school, and the stigma around it needs to end. And the one way I can help with that is by talking about mine. And that's why I want to talk about it, because so many people deal with it that I think it's irresponsible not to talk about the things I go through if it helps even one person with what they're dealing with. And I want all of my cohort, all of my colleagues, I want them all to succeed. I don't want to see anyone struggling with these things. Because I know how difficult it is, especially for me. I've personally been diagnosed with multiple mental health issues, which I lovingly call my alphabet soup. And so dealing with things like ADHD, obsessive compulsive tendencies, my OCD is under tendencies. I guess I just got tendencies because I didn't qualify for the full range of the OCD requirements for a OCD diagnosis. So I have obsessive compulsive tendencies, which can be very distracting and very consuming. I also have generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, which means I am anxious about everything all the time, and it's very exhausting. That's one of the things that I'll be touching on, is how exhausting it is to deal with all of this. So I also got diagnosed a while ago with adjustment disorder, which is supposed to be a temporary disorder that will go away after some therapy. However, my therapy was cut off, and adjustment issues can actually be part of PTSD, which is probably what ended up happening with me, is that I had adjustment disorder because of a specific traumatic event. I got kicked out of my house and I was homeless for a couple years and lived permanently in the dormitories until then the university cut off my financial aid without information on why, or without any warning. Suddenly I owed them $6,000 and I could no longer live in the dorms. Because of that, I couldn't apply for my spring semester classes, so I argued with the housing about letting me stay for the winter session so I could save up enough money, because I worked on campus with 2 different jobs, and get a place of my own, and I managed to be able to do that. So I was never on the street, but it was an extremely stressful time for me. So I'm also going to talk on things like executive dysfunction with large project deadlines, because someone specifically asked me about that. And then depression and imposter syndrome we're going to talk about. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences with PTSD and DID as a graduate student, because that's something that a lot of students who have dissociative disorders have issues with finding people who will be supportive of them and understand, because dissociative disorders can be very intense and, again, exhausting. So first I want to talk about some coping skills. Coping skills can come in a variety of uh, you can cope with your mental health issues in a variety of ways. The list that I particularly like says you can do distraction, grounding, emotional release, like laughing, crying, screaming, all of that helps. Um, Self love, and then a thought challenge, which is where you write down the things that you're thinking, your invasive thoughts, and you write down, oh, these are the things that must be true, and you leave it for a little bit, not too long, but you go back and you look at it and you're like, this isn't true because this. I've done this before a couple of times. I haven't done it lately, but it has helped me. I have a lot of invasive thoughts about how I look and how I present myself to others. I feel like I annoy people. I feel like I'm imposing on them. I feel like I'm bothering them. I have a problem with feeling like I'm allowed to exist around other people. So that is one of the things I like to focus on when I do journaling like that, where I pinpoint what exactly my brain is trying to tell me, and then I go back and maybe not even like not longer than an hour, I'll go back and be like, well, that's not true. This is why it's not true, and the reason I was thinking it was because this happened and it triggered something in my brain that made me think that way. There's also this thing that, says to access your higher self. So it's things like paying it forward to other people by volunteering, complimenting someone, smiling at someone on the street who looks like they're having a bad day. This might only work in America. I don't know what country you're from, because I know that some places where if you smile at a stranger on the street, they'll think you're completely weird. In America, it's not too weird to smile at strangers on the street. It depends on what you're comfortable with. Another thing that's in that accessing your higher self, if you are a religious person, doing religious ritual like praying might help. I personally am a contemporary practicing pagan, as some of you may know. Some of the things that I do in my religion is very ritualistic, and it can feel like I'm being recharged. My battery in my brain, like my body, I feel so exhausted and worn out, but I feel like after certain rituals where I focus on certain aspects of my religion, communicate with the gods through prayer of some sort, it can make me feel extremely relaxed and relieved and like I'm okay to keep going for the day. So if you're a religious person and those things work for you, that might be something you can use as a coping skill as well. If you're not religious, there are, things that help that are kind of similar, like having a specific type of routine for the days you need to be productive. That might help you. So another thing that you can do aside from doing all those coping skills is making a coping skills box. I don't have mine with me, I keep it at home. Creating a coping skills box helps you do other things that we've already discussed as coping skills, such as grounding or emotional release. So you want to do things that access your five senses. So have music in there, or have a movie or a video or a TV show that you watch and it'll make you laugh or make you cry for your emotional release. Do things with touch, like having a stuffed animal that feels very soft. I personally have a stuffed animal that's like made for babies because it's extra soft, and that helps me ground myself with touch. Another touch grounding I can do if I'm out of my house and I don't have my coping skills is if I can find a bathroom somewhere, I will run cold water over my hands or on my face or both, and that helps me come back to reality if I'm in an attack of some sort. your coping skills box, when you access these sensations, focus on them. If you're in an attack, if you remember to go to your coping skills box. If you are eating something, which, if you have food, the coping skills box might not be an actual box, because I know everyone has their music and video and whatnot digitally, and so these are just things you can kind of put in the same area, so that way you can access them if you need them. So doing things like listening to music and focusing on the lyrics and the vocals of the singer, and listening intensely to how the instruments sound in the background. Try to identify the instruments, really focus on the music, and that will help you ground yourself. Same thing for a video or a movie. Access the emotions that you are feeling from watching these things. Let yourself laugh really hard. Let yourself laugh snort, because I do that, and that's how I think something's really funny. And so all of this stuff will help you cope when you're in an attack. So these are all coping skills for when you're feeling something coming up, or you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're very anxious. Uh, I am always anxious. I am always anxious about everything. I wake up anxious. I think about, I have to drive to work. I live in Las Vegas. People here drive really aggressively. I get scared just going on the highway. I'm afraid I'm going to get pulled over by a police officer. All of this stuff, it's in my brain constantly, so I have to find a way to ground myself. And when I'm driving, that's singing for me. So that's my emotional release, is singing, and especially if it's something that it's intense and powerful. That's why I like doing opera or certain Broadway songs, because I have a belting voice, and that I focus all of my anger and my anxiety, because my anxiety can manifest as an irritation and anger a lot of the time, and I pull it into myself, and then I release it with the music. And that's something you can do too. So if you are a singer or a musician, that's something that I think really helps me. And so if that helps you, I think that's something you can try to do. I'm sure a lot of you already do that and feel better after listening or singing along to music. So that's one of the things that I really like to focus on as somebody who used to do musical theater a lot, and that used to be my big release of emotion and intensity. So I always felt less anxious, even if I was, I had stage fright. I felt less anxious after I was done, because I just got it all out on stage. Okay, so we went over the coping skills and the box of coping skills you wanted, and the box of coping skills you could use for these things. Now, my next thing is going to be about the preventative type of measures to avoid coming up on any of these attacks. And so, first and foremost, as a student, identify what type of accommodations you will need. As someone with ADHD and dissociative disorders, I need extra time a lot for things like papers or tests. So either I will make sure I give myself enough time, or that I start early enough that I can finish it. But if you know that this is the type of accommodation you need, identify all of that, and then figure out what type of information, paperwork, letters, anything that your disabilities office will need to give you those accommodations. So once you do that and you do all the paperwork, which is usually not too bad, but I know some disabilities offices can be really difficult to navigate. So if you have trouble, just try to push through. I know that with mental health issues, it is difficult to do this paperwork and have these people, it feels like they're judging you. But remember that your accommodations for school isn't you taking advantage of anything. You're not getting special treatment. You're leveling the playing field for you against people who don't need these accommodations. The people who can function without having accommodations are able to do that. Your accommodations are just helping you make your progress through the program. So there is no shame in getting accommodations. There should be a disabilities office at every university. This is specific to America because I'm American and we have the American Disabilities Act. The ADA, you get accommodations. It's against the ADA for them to not give it to you. I'm not sure how it works in other countries, so if you're from another country, just comment below and tell me how the process works there so we can get a conversation going about that. But as an American or people in American universities, you are entitled to your accommodations if you need them. So don't feel bad and don't feel discouraged. You can get your accommodations and you should get them. It's making things accessible to you. This is an accessibility issue. There's no reason you should feel bad about it, and I know some people do, so that's why I wanted to address it here. And so from that, these are some of the things that I have done or I am going to try in the near future as a list of things that help me deal with the things. This is the stuff that helps me deal with having to time manage with all of my mental health issues, which again can be exhausting. So I'm gonna start talking about them, and I'm gonna be looking down and up a lot because of the paper. So the first thing is lists. Lists help me a lot, but don't overwhelm your list. Make 3-5 top tasks you need to finish in a day and have them on your list. Once you get through those, you're done for the day. Those are your top tasks that are pressing and need to be done today. Otherwise, don't worry about the small things. Then you should identify the time of day you are most productive. So that can be a lot of different things for a lot of different people. Not everyone is not everyone is productive at the same time of day, and some people are more productive over breaks. So even though you're supposed to be taking a break from school, if you're more productive at that time, you should work at that time. Find out what works for you and do it that way, but still allow yourself to take breaks while you're working. I'm not saying like blow off everything for a whole week, but make sure you are not continuously working on one thing for hours upon hours without breaks, because I know that some people will have that issue. The next thing is relevant to what I just said. Timers. I use timers for different parts of the day for my tasks. I will say, okay, I am going to read my homework for an hour, which, it for somebody who has like a lot of readings and dyslexia and ADHD, it might not be a lot of things, but after the hour, I give myself anywhere from a 10 to 30 minute break, because you'll have more trouble processing the things you're reading if you try to force yourself, and you won't get as much done. So I set timers for both my working times and for my breaks. So I'll set, okay, this is my timer for an hour, and then I'll set a timer for 15 to 30 minutes after that, and that's my break time. So once the first alarm goes off, I'm like, okay, I get to read, I get to watch an episode of a comedy, or I get to watch YouTube, or I get to go stretch or walk. And it's something that I will be able to, do without having any issues with time management, because I've timed everything, so this is the time that I'm doing it. The other thing, so my timers aren't always just 1 hour, but there are things called power hours that you can do. I actually started this because I do National Novel Writing Month every year, which again is not a good idea if you're in grad school, and a lot of people use it to do academic writing. I didn't do that, and that ended up being very stressful for me. So If you do NaNoWriMo every year, then just try to focus on maybe academic writing instead of trying to write a whole novel on top of everything else. So there's like sprints that you do in NaNoWriMo where you'll set a amount of words you want to write in a certain amount of time. So you set a timer, you set your words. There are programs you can do. There's like online programs where it will like cut off everything else on your internet until you reach like 500 words. So if you do something like that, that might help too. So say you're working on your thesis or your dissertation or a paper, and you're like, okay, I want to do a power hour and I want to get 1,000 words out. So you sit down and you write 1,000 words, and then if you're done before the hour, then you take a break. If you get to almost 1,000 words and you hit the hour mark, you still have accomplished a lot in that hour. So, you know, those types of things like sprints and like challenging yourself, sometimes that can help. If those things make you anxious, don't do that. So if those things make you anxious, you don't have to do them. It's something that I've found helps me because it makes me turn off my brain for a minute and go, okay, I need to focus on just this for this hour, and then after that I can take a break. So that's what I do, is I give myself the task, I set a timer, and then I give myself a break, and then I repeat. And I am actually very bad at keeping to that sometimes. I do end up overwhelming myself a lot. So don't give yourself something that you think will be too overwhelming for you. Another thing that I'm going to start doing, I haven't done it yet, is keeping a work journal, like for my academic progress. Getting accomplishments done, even if they're small accomplishments, those are still accomplishments. And once you get to a goal of some sort, I saw that someone started using a like gold star system, you know, like we did in, you know, grade school or whatever, and it helps make you feel like you've accomplished something. So say every 200 words, I'm going to give myself a star and a 10-minute break. You get a little gold star, you get a 10-minute break, and then you go back to it, and then before you know it, that page is like full of, you know, your stickers or whatever. You don't have to have gold stars, you can have whatever type of stickers you desire. Dollar store always has fun ones. So you can, you know, just make some type of small reward system to help you motivate and feel like you're accomplishing things, even if they're small tasks. Small accomplishments are still accomplishments, and you should celebrate them. I know that it's really hard for some of us to think, oh, you know, getting through this week's readings, and I read all of them, including the recommended reading, doesn't feel like an accomplishment. But when you look at how many pages those are, and you are a person with ADHD and dyslexia, that is a good accomplishment. So celebrate your accomplishments. You are working really hard. So remember that. So the other thing to remember is to ask for extensions when you need them. Your professors, most of the time, want you to succeed, and reaching out and saying, look, I am having trouble, I'm going to need an extra day or two, is that all right? A lot of times they'll even give you extra time, more than you've asked for, and so you can work on it. I've turned in a couple papers late because I've worked like over the, like, maybe an hour over the deadline, but I still was able to turn it in. But if I had just asked for an extension, I'm sure I would have gotten it with no problem. I asked for extensions last semester because of not health issues that pertain to me, but that affected me because my fiance had issues with their disability, so I was helping them with something, and my professor allowed me to turn in things months late, which was very, very accommodating of her, and I really appreciated it. So ask for extensions. If they say no, do your best, but remember that you are still accomplishing a lot with having these things on top. I have never been denied an extension ever from anyone, so just reach out to your professors and hopefully you'll have the same experience as that. So the next thing I want to mention is journaling in general can help, whether it's online or in a physical journal, writing down things like your intrusive thoughts, just a stream of consciousness where you just write down everything you're thinking to get it out of your brain. Sometimes that can help clear your mind, especially for somebody who has ADHD. A lot of times it's really hard for you to do things like meditate. So doing something like this is just writing everything you're thinking, just write everything your brain is saying, helps a lot just to get it out, and that can help you clear your mind because it physically feels like you're pulling it out. And when you're doing it about like intrusive thoughts, one of the things that you can also do is once one of the things you can do is once you're done writing it, you can crumble up the paper and throw it away, or set it on fire, or bury it, or something, if it's, not gonna hurt where you bury it. If you do that, you can kind of associate that with the release of those things. Like, okay, these are all my intrusive thoughts. I'm going to crumble them and put them in the trash. They are no longer a part of me. They can go away. I know that that helps some people, but I also know that intrusive thoughts, sometimes you should lean into them and embrace them and think about why you're thinking that. So do what is right for you. That's the most important part. So the next thing is just taking walks, going into nature, kind of absorbing your surroundings. I know that not everyone lives by nature, but if you live by a park or some type of, woody area, or even if you just want to take a walk around your neighborhood, just focus on the things you see while you're doing your walk and just let that kind of help your mind reboot and marinate the things you're thinking about, and just breathe in the fresh air, or the freshest the air can get. I live in Las Vegas, like I said, it's not very fresh here. So it just all depends on you. Taking walks is something that I don't do very often, but I definitely should. Two other things that I use for time management is using calendars, both physical calendars and digital calendars like Google Calendar, because I can get it online and on my phone. And so using the calendar, I can put in all the things that are due, all the things that are coming up, and it gives me alarms and reminders, so I can set it to say, a week from now is when you have your midterm, so be prepared for that. Things like that. So that's really important, is if calendars work for you, use a physical calendar and a digital calendar. The digital calendar is good because it can give you reminders that will just come up on its own when you schedule it to. So I like to do that, so that way it's scheduled. I like the physical calendar as well because the act of writing it down, especially if you've already typed it into your digital calendar, helps you remember that these things are important that are coming up. So with that, you'll be able to kind of keep track of things that are due, and that helps me a lot when I know that there's a big project coming up, like a midterm essay or something like that. The other thing that I do every semester, because I know that if I keep them separate, I will forget things, is I take all my syllabi from every class I am taking in that semester, and I combine them into one large syllabus on Google Docs. So that way, one, I can access it from anywhere. So if I end up going to the library or something and I didn't bring my computer with me, and I can access one of the computers at the school library, that way I know, okay, so I can do these things, and then I can get off the computer and know what I have to do, or I can check it on my phone because I have Google Docs on my phone. So if you have so if you're an undergraduate and you have 5 classes, say, but checking each and every syllabus every time is a lot. I know it will look overwhelming to have all of your due dates and assignments in one spot, but for me personally, I think that makes it easier for me because I know, okay, these are what are due in this order, so it's not as overwhelming as, say, 5 separate syllabi that are going to make it harder for you to follow it for later. So for me, luckily, I've only taken 2 to 3 courses per semester because I'm a graduate student. Even then, I will have maybe a 7 to 14 page syllabus depending on how much reading and assignments I have to do. But knowing that I put that in there is helpful, especially when you have an assignment that isn't necessarily dated for you in your syllabus. So say you have to sign up for a presentation, you can put that in your personalized syllabus, and then you know, okay, this is when my presentation is coming up. It's not going to be the same for everyone, obviously, so that way you can create your own syllabus that will help with that. So for that syllabus, the reason I like doing it on Google Docs is because I will make 2 copies of it. I have the original combined syllabus, and then I have a combined syllabus that I delete my assignments off of. So it's not just crossing it out and then you still have like a 7 to 15 page syllabus, but with Google Docs, the thing that's kind of satisfying for me is that as you progress through the semester, it gets shorter. So at the beginning of my last semester, I think my combined syllabus was 14 pages because I was taking 3 graduate level classes, so there was a lot of readings, there's a lot of assignments. I had things like presentations, I had things like discussion posts, I had to be a discussion leader for discussion posts, which meant I had to put in my dates for that so then I would be able to follow it easier. But as I went on, as I deleted it, it helped me feel less overwhelmed with how much work I had left because it was all in one spot, and because as I was deleting it, it would get shorter. So once I got to the point of halfway through the semester, it was only like 6 pages long, and that felt relieving to me. It wasn't as intense or dizzying as looking at, oh wow, I have 14 pages of work to do. But for me, that's why it was so helpful, is having it in all one spot, having your presentation dates, having your dates that you have to give a talk or, you know, anything where an event is coming up, you can put it in there like extra credit for this class if I attend this lecture in this particular building on campus. Having those things in there will help you instead of trying to keep track of 5 different syllabi or rewriting it by hand in your agenda book. I used to do that as an undergrad, but I found that doing it with Google Docs this way has actually helped me a lot. And I will print it out sometimes and cross things off, but as I progress through the semester, I'll have the midterm one printed out after that, and then it feels less overwhelming. So I just wanted to add that. So I wanted to let you all know that that's 2 things that I do that helps me prevent being overwhelmed by my assignments to the point where I have difficulty finishing them or anything like that. So I just wanted to let you all know those are 2 of the other things that I do. And that way, if you want to try that and it helps you, then I'm glad. And if it doesn't work, let me know what did work for you. I want to know what type of thing is more beneficial to different people, because like I said, I used to handwrite everything and that was helpful for a while, but when you get to a point where you could possibly be somewhere and you've forgotten your agenda book, it's a lot easier to pull up Google Docs on a computer or your phone, because let's be honest, who around us is going to forget their phone over a book? Honestly, I mean, maybe it's just my millennial tendencies, but I always have my phone with me. I know where that is at all times. I will lose textbooks, but I have my phone, which is why I've started doing more digital textbooks than anything else. I know there's a big difference between master's and PhD programs, but remember that you are there for a reason and you belong. Concentrate on self-reflection as well. Try not to compare yourself to others. I am extremely guilty of this, especially the specific professor that I've talked about who said I would never get into grad school, the first thing I thought was, I'm going to look at his CV and I'm going to make sure I'm better than him after I'm done. And you know what? I need to let that go because my work is completely different than his. My research interests, my area, my topics, completely opposite of what he does. So there's no reason for me to compare myself to him. And I did get into grad school. So what he says no longer matters. So try to remember to reflect on yourself and not to think that those people around you are better than you somehow. You should all be building each other up and supporting each other, not competing. Making things a competition can be really stressful for multiple reasons, but in my opinion, we should be supportive of each other. We're all academics, we're all working towards a similar goal, but all of our work is different. You can't really compare each other. There's no way that somebody is going to have my perspective on contemporary pagan religions' use of ancient works to rebuild the religions, because I am a practicing pagan, but my practice is very specific to me. So my work is not going to be reflective of anyone else's. So remember that you are unique and therefore your accomplishments are unique. You don't need to compare yourself to anyone else because your accomplishments are great just because they're yours. You should also remember that we're all learning. Everyone is learning. No one is perfect. We are all a work in progress. When you have things that frustrate you or give you a little bit of anxiety, or you're feeling like you've failed in some way, try to reassess and figure out why you feel that way, and then try to turn it into some type of learning opportunity for yourself. For example, I got my first B plus in a graduate program. I in this particular graduate program, I got a B in my last one. So I think that's part of why it stung, because I've worked so hard to get straight A's in my master's program because I have a less than stellar undergraduate. So I ended up doing almost all A's. I have 6 A's, 1 A minus, and then I have the B plus, and I felt very frustrated and distressed when I read that, but it was for history of Greek literature. We were going from the Iliad and the Odyssey all the way to late antiquity. That's a lot of ground to cover. That was a lot of reading. That was a lot of material. I had a very intense final paper, and I learned a lot. So I tried to reassess and realize that that grade, while it's stressful to me and I joke that it will bother me for the rest of my life, I needed to realize that I still learned a lot in that class. I still have a paper that I would like to expand on and possibly publish, because I realized as I was writing it what I was getting at with the subject matter, which I haven't seen yet in any academic papers lately. So reassess what you feel like your failures are and pull it in and think, what about this did I actually fail? I didn't fail anything. I got a B plus in a graduate program at Villanova University. That's pretty impressive, and that it's a really good school. So anyone who's challenging themselves intellectually in a graduate program and you get a good grade, it should be celebrated. So I had to reassess that and make my brain turn off that perfectionism. I have an issue with perfectionism and with feeling like I need to be the expert at everything. That's my type of imposter syndrome, is the expert. So I have to remember I am still learning. I am only a master's student. It's only going to get more intense from here. So I am trying to reroute my brain to think these are successes. So again, Small accomplishments are still accomplishments. You should celebrate them. Keep in mind that, you have a lot to offer. Your ideas are unique. No one else is going to think like you do. Everyone's brain is different. So remember that. You're you. And in reality, none of us should have imposter syndrome because everyone has really unique and interesting ideas. So we should try to remember that and build each other up. And I feel like that can alleviate a lot of the imposter syndrome, is when people are encouraging and build each other up, which is part of why I am really glad I joined academic Twitter, because it helps me. So, having a support system and a community like academic Twitter, or your cohort, or your friends and family outside of academia, all of these things will help you. So, the next thing I'm going to talk about, there's specific questions that I had someone send me, and it has to do with PTSD. So I'm going to talk about that for a minute, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about DID, because that's something that quite a few people deal with, but obviously might not talk about it. So I want to talk about all of that real quick. So I have a list of questions that was asked to me almost a whole year ago before I decided to make this video. So I'm going to go through them and talk about it. If we've kind of already touched on it, I'll skip over it a little bit, and then I will continue, and then it'll be the end of the video. So the first question is, how do you deal with your triggers in a study environment, like being in class, or being in the library or something like that? So for the study environment, I actually, as an undergraduate, would email my professors about, hey, I have PTSD. One of my English classes was about the troubles of Northern Ireland. Part of my PTSD is in relation to car accidents. And if you're familiar with the troubles, which some of you will be if you're from that area, there are a lot of car explosions that occur in film or shows that depict troubles. And in that class, we were going to watch video clips, and so car accidents, anything that have to do with cars being destroyed, will really mess me up. So I told the professor that, and he told me if I needed to step out of the classroom, I could just nod at him and show him that I was going to leave. And he said, you can either go home if it's too much, and then just email me that you're not coming back, or stay in the hallway, and then when you feel like you're calm enough, you can come back in. So he gave me the option of either completely leaving the class with no repercussions, just go back to your dorm and calm down, or if being just outside the classroom on a bench where I can just stare at a wall that has like a stain on it and just keep my mind there for a couple minutes. And then he let me know that the video clip was over. He allowed that. The other thing I had to do as an undergrad, and this was because actually my graduate program has been extremely good about getting trigger warnings or content warnings on all of our readings. So for me, I've not had this trouble in my graduate program because I've always been warned, so I can brace myself. But as an undergrad, I took a fantasy literature class, and one of our books was Who Fears Death, and the main character is a child of rape. And it's a very intense book. It's a very good book, but I had to email my professor and let her know that I was having trouble making it through, because in therapy I had literally just finished becoming comfortable even saying the word again. So I told her, I was like, I'm having a lot of issues getting through this book. It might take me longer than the assigned time, and she told me that it was fine after I'd explained it. So as an undergraduate, I dealt with a lot of that talk to your professors. If you have accommodations through your university, you should be fine. If you don't have accommodations, I didn't as an undergrad. Uh, if you don't have accommodations or not able to, try to talk to them, and a lot of the times they will be really receptive. So, in my experience, I haven't had any trouble with that. If you reach out to your professors, 9 times out of 10, they are going to be supportive of you. I only had one professor be dismissive of my issues because it was a year I was having a lot of trouble with my DID and I was losing time. So I would have days that I don't remember. I lost all of April that year. I don't remember it still. So she told me to drop out of school and to come back when I was better. And that doesn't really work with one, mental health issues, and two, dissociative identity disorder. That's really difficult to get better from. Um, I spent 10 years in therapy being able to break down some walls and communicate with the others who share my brain, and now it's okay, but there's still times where it gets really intense. So I would say find a way that you can talk to your professors, and if you can't, you're in university, and I know if you're in a small class this is really anxiety inducing, but if you have to leave the room, leave. You should be taking care of your health first. So if you have to leave the room and you need to go back to your dormitory or your apartment, leave the room, email your professor, and just say, look, I was extremely triggered. I needed to remove myself from the situation. I was taking care of myself. So that is important. So make sure you remove yourself if you need to. Identify spots on campus that might be safe spaces for you. There were really particular areas in both the English building as my undergrad and in the English building as an undergrad and in the library that I felt extremely safe. So if I couldn't go all the way back to my dorm or my house, I would go there. So find the spots that you feel are safe for you and use those and talk to your professors. Dealing with coursework on bad days is the next question. How do I deal with that? A lot of it is the preventative measures we've already talked about. But if it's a really bad day and I feel like I can't get anything done, I don't do it. I will give myself time to rest. If my brain cannot comprehend the things I'm reading, it's not going to do me any good trying to force myself to read 200 pages. So I let myself rest because that's my brain telling me you need to do something else. So I will sit down and I will literally watch an entire season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine if that's what my brain needs. So, I'm not saying that you should just sit on the couch when you have a bad day, but if you need to take one, you should. So sometimes I will say, okay, I need to at least get 2 of these readings done today because it's due tomorrow. But if I have to skip this article, it's fine. Just try to prioritize what you think is the most important thing. And if you cannot do any of it, that's when you ask for the extension, or you explain to the professor, look, I was having a really bad brain day yesterday and I couldn't focus. So I didn't do the readings, but I will make sure I do them in the coming week. So, there's a lot of negotiation that goes into that. And I think that you'll be all right as long as you make sure you're open with your professors and you give yourself time to rest. So the next question's a lot, so I'm just going to read it. Are your lecturers and or classmates aware of your situation? If so, how did they react, and how have they provided any support or accommodations? So some of my professors are aware. I honestly, with this program, I've not said anything until it's come up, but like last year, my my uncle died, and I was really, really close with him. It was really hard for me. I was, that grief can be really hard to deal with as a grad student. And I was on the floor crying at work at one point. I don't remember what day it was. I just remember collapsing on the floor and just bawling my eyes out. So I sent an email to my professor saying, I know it's the beginning of the semester, but I just heard that my uncle died and we were really close, and so I might be a little slow to start. So it depends on your professors, because a lot of them will be extremely sympathetic because they've gone through this too. So they didn't understand. And so for that, my professors know about things like my fiance's epilepsy. They know about my PTSD. They know about my anxiety and my depression, my bipolar disorder. So they know about that. So if I reach out to them, they'll give me extensions for things, or they'll like excuse me from class if I need to be excused. All of them actually have been really good about offering these things without me asking beforehand. When I took my gender and sexuality class, my professor actually put content warnings on everything that might have been an issue for us. She let us leave the classroom, and she told us that we could come back, or if we needed to stay out of the classroom, the class is recorded, so if we needed to go back and watch it at our own pace, we could do that. So on the bright side, my program's already got accommodations built in. So I haven't had to ask for a lot of things. And my classmates don't necessarily know. A lot of them will now if they watch my channel. But I haven't gotten any bad reactions from anyone. Obviously, there's still a stigma, especially in academia, about mental health, which is why I'm making this video. But I think that if you just talk about it with your professors, you should be fine. And I've already talked about getting your disability accommodations from the disabilities office. If you're in a different country where your university doesn't have like a legal obligation to do that, look into seeing what kind of things you can get accommodations for. I know it varies in different European countries and the UK and Ireland and everything, so I'm not sure what you would have to do. And if any of you are from those countries, anywhere outside of America, and you want to share how you got disability accommodation, or if you know how disability accommodation works, again, put it in the comments below, and that way we can start this conversation. Okay, so the last question is, what should a person with PTSD looking into pursuing higher education, especially postgrad, be aware of? So that, especially for me, is identifying your triggers, figuring out what will set you off, and identifying at potential schools where you will feel unsafe. So for me, for my PTSD, a lot of it has to do with continuous childhood abuse, sexual abuse, and trauma. And then in college, things happened to me again. And then I was also one of the victims of somebody who put in a recording device in the handicap stall in the English building, and I was not out as trans yet for to anyone in my work. I worked for the public safety department. So when they found the camera and they found the photos, they found things of me, and I was wearing a packy and a binder. For those of you who don't know, who aren't trans, a packy is a device you can wear on your lower half for people who are assigned female at birth, if you want to have a usable penis. So I had that, and I had my binder on to flatten my chest. And so not only was I violated in the way of being videotaped while I was in a bathroom, but I was also changing, and then you would see, you know, me using my devices to make my dysphoria alleviate. I'm non-binary, but there are some days where I feel more masculine or more male, and that's when I use those things. So when the police officer came to me, it was one of the women police officers, first of all, and second of all, it was someone I worked with. And so not only was I violated in the way that this person saw me, but so did my coworkers, and it outed me, and I did not want to be out yet at my work because I worked for the police, and none of them said anything very assuring before I came out that made me feel comfortable with coming out, so I was outed. So um, you never know what can happen on a university campus. That person ended up getting expelled, but so I, that was one of the things that actually, came like with evidence, and I was approached at like 5:30 in the morning when I got to work about it. So for me, for someone with PTSD, know your triggers, be careful, and just work with other people and utilize your counseling if you get it provided by the university. It's really helpful if you can do that. So, aside from all of that, I have DID, like I said, and that can be really stressful. I lost an entire month as an undergrad in April. Tucker was out most of the time. He was the very polite Southern boy who ended up talking to a lot of people, making friends everywhere. He also smoked, but I'm allergic to cigarette smoke, so I don't know how he managed that. And so he doesn't anymore. I No, we don't allow that anymore. But he was out for that entire month because that's what my friends told me because I don't remember it still. But after 10 years of therapy, I can communicate with almost everybody in here. Um, but when you do therapy for this, you might end up finding new people or people who've been dormant for a while. So there's about 2 dozen people sharing my brain. So that can get pretty exhausting, but they all have their own hobbies and things that they like to do that they can do on my off time. So everyone's so far been pretty happy. So that's good. Um, so if anybody has any questions, suggestions, discussion prompts, anything like that, please leave a comment below. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long video, but I think it was really important. And I will see you all in the next video.